Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into one of the most fundamental questions in all of philosophy and neuroscience. What is the true operating system of the human mind? We are looking past the specifics of memory or, language and asking, is the brain a classical computer built on symbolic logic? Or is it a dynamic, embodied survival engine dedicated to forecasting the future?
Right. And the central question we face is whether the mind functions primarily by manipulating abstract internal representations, which is the classical computational theory of mind, or CTM, or whether its main job is to, actively predict and minimize sensory surprise through a constant cycle of interaction with the body and the environment. That's the world of predictive processing, or PP, and embodied cognition.
Exactly. And I'll be defending CTM today, arguing for the necessity of structured internal computations to account for the sheer systematicity and productivity of complex high-level thought.
And I'll be championing the predictive processing framework. I believe the brain's primary imperative is not abstract rule following, but really the minimization of prediction error across all levels, which intrinsically links cognition, action, and the external world in a way that I think CTM struggles to unify.
So the foundation of the computational theory of mind is that the mind is, at its core, an information processing system. It's an old idea in a way. It views the brain as the hardware and cognition as the software. The fundamental idea inherited from some of the early thinkers is that cognitive processes operate on internal representations, the mind's own data structures. Now, whether those are discrete symbols, or distributed patterns in a neural network, or even probabilistic beliefs, the core commitment is computation, a structured, systematic manipulation of internal codes. And this framework is essential because it's the only one that really explains the systematicity and productivity of human thought. I mean, think about language. We can generate infinite, novel, meaningful sentences from a finite set of words and rules. You need compositionality, the ability to combine parts into a meaningful whole. And CTM, especially models that use a kind of predicate argument structure, gives us the structural resources to explain that complexity. Modern AI, particularly the success of advanced models like transformers and complex reasoning and language tasks, it really demonstrates that CTM principles capture something essential and scalable about intelligent processing. The power is in the structured manipulation of these internal encodings, allowing for abstraction and reasoning far beyond just immediate sensory input.
Okay, I see where you're coming from, but I come at it from a completely different way. To call the brain an information processor, that almost implies a passive reception of data, doesn't it? But the brain is fundamentally a survival machine and an active one. Its mandate is minimizing prediction error, or what some proponents call free energy, across all levels, from low-level sensory perception all the way up to high-level planning. This perspective fundamentally shifts the purpose of the brain. It's not about analyzing input, it's about forecasting input.
Right.
So perception, then, isn't passive data uptake. It's the brain constantly generating these top-down hypotheses, these generative models, about what's causing the sensory input. If the sensory input matches a prediction, the error is minimal and the prediction is confirmed. If not, the error is sent up the hierarchy to update the model. And crucially, this framework unifies perception and action through something called active inference. Action isn't an output that requires separate motor commands. Predictions about the required proprioceptive states directly drive movement, all in the service of canceling error. This means the body and environment aren't just interfaces, they are constitutive of cognition. They help constrain and even define the very information that's being processed.
You describe a very elegant, unified loop, and I will concede that the elegance of prediction error minimization is compelling. But when we move from this basic sensory motor loop to high-level, human-specific cognition, that's where CTM's strength really emerges. I'm talking about the scaling up problem, the leap from basic prediction to what some call representation-hungry phenomena. How? Within a purely prediction error minimization framework, do you explain thinking about objects that are absent, or things that are purely abstract? For instance, the imagination required to draw a unicorn from memory, or a more complex example, contemplating a purely hypothetical political structure. These concepts have no immediate causal correlation in the sensory world to trigger a stored, action-oriented representation. They require robust, structured internal representations that have genuine systematicity and compositionality. We are talking about something akin to a language of thought, or the kind of predicate-argument structures that neurolinguistic research supports as the foundation for complex logical processes and planning. Without those stable, abstract structures, I just don't see how PP can account for the sheer depth and structural coherence of abstract human reasoning.
That's the classic critique, right? The what about the unicorn argument. But the error here, I think, is assuming the body is somehow irrelevant to abstract thought. The challenge for CTM is that its symbolic representations are so often disconnected from the analog, continuous nature of neural computation and, the environment itself. While you focus on the logical structure of thought, PP focuses on the biological relevance of thought.
Okay, but what does that mean in practice?
Well, the strength of PP lies in its action-oriented representations, which are structural models of what we call the affective niche, that is, the causal structure of the environment as it relates directly to the organism's homeostatic integrity and its survival. So even when drawing a unicorn, the abstract concept is constrained and realized through proprioceptive feedback, motor control, and the constant error minimization involved in projecting that internal model onto the external world. The abstract thought still occurs within a body, and that body is actively constraining the information being processed. And furthermore, your claim really hinges on this idea that the body is just an interface. Some proponents of a moderate embodied cognition might suggest an agent could be simulated in a vat if you gave it simulacra of bodily signals, implying the body is only enabling function. Radical PP rejects this entirely. The body is not just a better designed container. It regulates cognitive activity. It acts as a distributor of cognitive load, and it is fundamentally constitutive of the mind. Our thoughts about unicorns are still ultimately in the service of an organism navigating its world.
I see why you frame it that way, trying to ground cognition in biology. But if we push that constitutive role of the body too far, we risk losing explanatory precision. And this leads me directly to a crucial conceptual hurdle for PP. I'm just not convinced by the claim that PP constitutes a mature scientific theory, because it faces a serious challenge with scientific rigor and falsifiability.
How so?
Its immense flexibility is both its major selling point and its scientific liability. PP can accommodate almost any empirical finding post hoc by simply adjusting the weightings on precision at different levels of the hierarchy, or by adding new layers to the generative model. If every unexpected result can be explained away by adjusting a free parameter, in this case, the confidence the brain places in its predictions versus its sensory evidence, well, PP risks becoming empirically vacuous. It functions more as a powerful high-level metaphor than a testable scientific theory. Critics suggest that PP sometimes chooses abstraction over specification when it's pressed for concrete neural implementation, which makes it really difficult to prove wrong. If a theory explains everything, does it truly explain anything?
That's a fair and intellectually rigorous challenge, and it's one that PP proponents take seriously. I would argue, though, that CTM, particularly symbolic CTM, often faces the inverse problem. Its rigor comes at the cost of biological possibility, leading to these very difficult bridging problems between the symbols and the messy reality of neurons. But PP, especially when it's formalized through active inference, actually generates specific falsifiable predictions that are being actively confirmed by neuroscience. We're not just talking about abstract philosophy here. For instance, PP explicitly predicts that different neural populations should be dedicated to signaling top-down predictions versus bottom-up prediction errors. We now have neuroscientific evidence, especially in visual cortices like V1, identifying separate neural subpopulations that do, in fact, encode these two streams. Similarly, predictions about how attention, which PP models as the modulation of precision, affects neural gain have been tested and verified across multiple sensory modalities.
Okay.
And furthermore, many of the CTM frameworks you champion, like connectionist models and reinforcement learning, can often be seen as specific, constrained instances of the broader active inference and PP framework.
CTM excels when it links algorithmic insights like David Marr's hierarchical vision model to neurobiology. But PP is striving to provide the unifying underlying principle, the minimization of variational free energy, that explains why all these separate CTM mechanisms exist in the first place.
That's a compelling argument for convergence at the mechanistic level. I'll grant you that. But the conceptual divergence remains profound when we talk about agency and motivation. You've defined the mind as a survival machine dedicated to error minimization. This leads us directly to the dark room problem.
Ah, yes, the dark room.
If the entire goal of the predictive brain is the cancellation of prediction error, why does any living organism pursue novelty, or explore, or seek out surprise? The state of maximal efficiency, the state of zero prediction error, is a state of eternal, sensory-deprived stasis, just sitting still in a soundproof dark room where every sensory input is perfectly predicted, because it's nothing. This state is, well, it's fundamentally pathological and completely incompatible with the intrinsic, adaptive activity of living systems. The pursuit of knowledge, or art, or exploration, all activities that generate massive, controlled surprise, are fundamentally mysterious under a simplistic prediction minimization framework.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the darkroom problem is a fatal flaw for predictive processing because it relies on a very simplistic, almost caricatured interpretation of what the brain is predicting. The objective of the brain is not simply to avoid immediate surprise. The objective is to maximize Bayesian model evidence for the organism's own existence. We call this autopoiesis, this fundamental drive for self-maintaining survival.
Okay, unpack that. How does that solve the problem?
This subtle shift means the system isn't trying to achieve stasis. It's trying to maintain the internal conditions necessary for life, homeostasis, and this requires dynamic interaction with the changing world. My existence model demands that I regulate my temperature, find food, and avoid predators. These are dynamic states, not static ones. The optimal prediction is not nothing changes, but I will successfully fulfill the expectations of my internal survival model. This necessitates active seeking of information and interaction, precisely to bring about the conditions that minimize long-term, existence-threatening surprise. Seeking novelty is often just seeking information to build a better, more robust model of the world, which maximizes long-term evidence for one's own existence.
That makes the PP framework much more flexible, but I would argue CDM still handles goal-directed behavior better because it relies on abstract, forward-looking beliefs, not just statistical expectations about survival. Human cognition demonstrates what we could call data-belief asymmetry. Think about genuine innovation. People pursue these grand strategic forward-looking goals like the Wright brothers pursuing flight, despite overwhelming existing data and empirical evidence, suggesting their beliefs are irrational or just impossible according to the prevailing statistical model of the world. If the mind were purely a statistical predictor minimizing error against the prevailing evidence, this kind of strategic decision-making, which relies on a deeper, forward-looking theory-based causal logic and the systematic manipulation of symbolic goals, struggles to be accounted for purely by prediction minimization. CTM provides the framework for formulating a belief that flies in the face of all current data.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. That ability to pursue radical goals is handled within active inference by assigning very high precision to deep, fixed prior beliefs, the goals themselves. So if the Wright brothers held this strong prior belief that flight was possible, the error signal generated by the sensory data, which said flight was impossible, will be suppressed or weighted less. This allows their actions to be driven by their internal conviction rather than the external sensory data. The system is designed to maintain the integrity of its highest level beliefs, even if that means seeking radically new data to prove them right.
So it's a kind of stubbornness built into the model?
You could call it that. It's a mechanism for controlled strategic interaction, not just passive statistical processing. The boundary between internal and external is defined by this continuous dynamic interchange, not by a kind of cognitivist predominance of internal abstract processing that just ignores overwhelming evidence.
Ultimately, CTM provides the foundational language for systematic compositional thought. Through its focus on structure, rules, and abstraction, It offers a powerful way to model complexity and remains central to developing human-level artificial intelligence systems that need to perform precise, representation-hungry tasks like complex reasoning and structured language processing. If we want an AI to think like us, it needs a syntax for thought, and CTM provides that blueprint.
The challenge CTM still faces, though, is connecting those abstract symbols back to the embodied dynamic reality of the organism, without leaving a huge gap between the logic gate and the living system. Predictive processing offers a truly unified, biologically plausible framework where the mind, body, and world are inextricably linked in a continuous cycle of prediction and action. It centers the mind not as a pure calculator, but as a system dedicated to maintaining its own fragile existence by minimizing surprise in an inherently uncertain world.
Both of these highly ambitious approaches aspire to be a theory of everything for the mind, seeking to unify perception, action, and higher-level reasoning.
And yet both face unresolved conceptual and empirical challenges, whether it's the hard problem of consciousness or fully accounting for the phenomenal complexity of human experience and the limits of structural modeling.
Which leaves us and the listener to consider whether the mind is fundamentally best described by syntactic rules governing internal states or by a continuous, embodied drive for self-evidencing survival.